Welcome to the Indian Sun. I have with me today Walangari Karntawarra, an Aboriginal elder from Alice Springs who now lives and works in Sydney. Walangari is a gifted musician, a cultural teacher, public speaker, and an Aboriginal cultural performer with a wonderful stage presence. He's an international award-winning Central Western desert painter, and his colorful and spellbinding works tell the traditional, dreaming stories of the world's oldest living culture. Walangari's work has been exhibited extensively both in Australia and internationally. He uses his art as a means of cross-cultural communication, and he's dedicated to improving the lot of his people. Welcome, Walangari. It's such an honor to have you on our show.
Thank you, Indira. It's a pleasure to be here.
First, I want to know about your early childhood years spent living a traditional lifestyle in the Australian outback. What is special to you about those memories?
Well, I had living my life in the bush. I was born in Alice Springs, in the Alice Springs Hospital, and but for the first probably much the first 7 years of my life, I grew up pretty much in the bush with my mother, and occasionally seeing other members of my family, but primarily I was by myself. So, because I was by myself, I was also I'm the firstborn, so I'm the first, the eldest great grandchild, and also the eldest great grandson. So the eldest great grandchild and this eldest grandson, and so I'm older than all my cousins. I'm the oldest male out of all my cousins and brothers and sisters, and so therefore I grew up by myself in the bush, and didn't have any toys, so never knew what a toy was, but basically the things I played with was I was very explorative, so inquisitive. I have an inquisitive mind, so I entertained myself, and I would play with lizards and birds and ants and insects and all sorts of things, and check out spiders and play with things and very dangerous critters. But I didn't know what they were. I just played with them, but didn't pick them up. I knew they were. I used to play with them with a stick or things like that, and so I've had a funny sort of relationship with animals.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when did you move to the cities, and when did you explore your paintings and your other works?
Well, my family grew up on a station. We all lived on a station pretty much after that, and we're all cattlemen. So we grew up on cattle stations, and a lot of my family provided the cattle and the horses for the First World War. So for the Light Horse Brigade, a lot of the horses that originate from that time still roam around the property. So they're called blue whalers. So they're a very famous Australian horse from the Light Horse Brigade. So I grew up, with my grandfather, and all my elders, they grew up as cattlemen. And but my mother wanted me to go to school, so she insisted that I attend school in town. So by the time I went from the bush into town and went to school. But the first a little while, I sort of rejected school because I was a boy from the bush and I didn't like school. And but then I was made to go to school by the welfare, and as a consequence, I was put into welfare homes, or not welfare homes, but a college called St. Philip's College, and it was a college where residential college where the students from surrounding cattle station properties, primarily white kids, attended this college, but there were also Aboriginal kids there as well, and most of us were there by as a result of the Welfare Act. That's my introduction to school there. So I had to go to school every day. We had to go to church every Sunday. We had to do all those sort of things. So it was part of my indoctrination in a way. Like I said, I have an inquisitive mind, so you can't readily indoctrinate me without me sort of figuring out what's going on. And so in the end, I sort of played the game and got myself an education in Alice Springs. But then when I was 15 years old, I had a chance to leave Alice Springs and travel to Adelaide and pursue my schooling there. So I left Alice Springs. I was very successful at school in Alice Springs, up in the high school there, and I won awards. I won a cooking award, and I remember I won a book called Black Beauty, which is about a horse again. So I love the story about the horse, Black Beauty, and then but I was also a very good athlete. So and I was a very good runner. And when I went to St. Philip's College, I had a coach who had taught me athletics and running and all that. And his coach was a man called Percy Seredy, and my coach was a man called Herb Elliott. And I don't know if you know Herb Elliott, but Herb Elliott is a famous Australian Olympian, and he was the first man to break the second man to break the minute mile.
Wow!
So they call it, yeah, and so he's world famous. But his coach, Percy Seredy, was also a world famous coach, and if you do, when you do high jump,
yep,
and you jump over the bar at school, for athletics, for Olympic Games or whatever, you jump over and you do what they call the Fosby flop. So you jump over backwards. Well, before the Fosby flop, they used to jump called the Western roll. So you had to jump over and you had to roll over the bar, front ways, not back ways. So that's the old style of jumping over in high jump. But the man who invented the Fosby flop was also Herb Elliott's coach. So he was my coach as well. So I had two world famous coaches coaching me when I was 13 years old. And I was going to they were trying to prime me up for the Olympic Games, because I was able to get the right timings, which gave me the right entrance into the Olympic Games. But because I was a little shy boy, I didn't go, and I refused. So yeah, so I don't know why, but that's what I did. So I could have got to the Olympic Games, but I didn't. But anyway, I became a school teacher in the end.
Okay.
So I'm a school teacher, and I've been teaching for 41 years.
Oh.
And I teach in universities and colleges and schools and workplace. I teach lawyers. I teach all sorts of people. Yeah.
So it looks like you're pretty much an all-rounder, from cooking to athletics and teaching. But then let's talk about the painting part of your career. I mean, you've done such amazing work. How did you start painting, and what do people think about your paintings?
Well, originally, how it all sort of started was, as a child, I used to always like to draw anyway. So I'd always draw. On my school books, I'd always do beautiful drawings, and I would decorate my school books. And my teachers always loved that. So I looked after my school books really beautifully. And I also used to doodle a lot. So, but I'd also do, I was also academic. I made sure I went to, I was the only boy in reading class. So and all the rest of them were all girls, like most of my cousins. But I was the only boy in reading class. And what happened was when I left, so I got sort of played around with art, and but never ever thought seriously about it. And but some of my uncles, not just some, but my great grandfather was Albert Namatjira, and he's the most famous Australian artist. And he still outsells. He died in 1970. In 59, but he still outsells every living artist in Australia. And he's also an Australian icon. He was the first man to become Aboriginal citizen in Australia, 10 years before we had the referendum. And so he was the first Aboriginal person to become a citizen in his own country, well, I might add. Because primarily before then we were regarded as flora and fauna. So we weren't even human beings when I was born. So I was under the Flora and Fauna Act up until I was 8 years old, and then it changed. Then I became a human being, officially human. And so during that time, a lot of my family they were already famous artists. So my grandfather, Paddy Carroll, they were already setting up, and they were already going to New York. And they were the Papunya Chula artists. And that's where the whole movement started. It was at Papunya. But before that movement, my great-grandfather Albert, he painted, but he didn't paint the dot style. He painted landscapes. And so what happened was, so there were two separate fields of art. One was landscape, which my great-grandfather started, and one was what they call the Papunya Chula or movement, which was our Papunya, and that's where the dot movement started. And so I've had this art in my family all the time, so famous artists. So and then one of my uncles, he was also a famous musician with a band called Us Mob, and they were one of the leading Aboriginal bands 40 years ago, and they were breaking new ground. A lot of our artists were then. And
what was the name of the band again?
Us Mob. US, yeah, Us Mob. So, and a fantastic rock band, Aboriginal rock band then. And he was a bass player. But not only was he a brilliant bass player, he was a brilliant artist. So I used to hang around with him, and I would just watch him paint. So I was fascinated, and I would sit there for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and just watching him paint these most amazing, beautiful landscape paintings. And they were almost three-dimensional. You could feel like you could actually reach in your hand and you could reach into the painting. That's how real it was. And so, but he was one of those artists that should have really become really big, but he didn't. And there are so many of us are like that are really great artists, but we don't pursue a career. We just want to paint for ourselves and for our family. And so that was what he was. But what happened was I went to Adelaide, got schooling down there. Then I came back to Alice Springs. I had a job. I was working as a carpenter, so I trained as a carpenter. I did 3 years in my trade, but unfortunately I couldn't finish because at that time my grandfather passed away, and I was very close to my grandfather, and that it's upset my life pretty much, but it changed my direction. And instead of pursuing carpentry, I stopped. And then something else happened, and then the course of my direction, my life changed again. And then I was out of work, and so I didn't know what to do. So I was going to join the army, and so I went to the in a registration office, got my papers, and then the sergeant at the desk, he said, "Oh well, go outside and have a little think, and then if you want to continue, come back in." So I said, "Okay." So I grabbed my papers. I went outside, walked around the building 3 times and left. Didn't go back. So I'm glad I didn't become a soldier. What
made you change your mind, though?
Because I'm a pacifist. So and I'm a warrior as an Aboriginal man. I defend my family and my land, but I don't go out and fight other people's wars. So that was what I thought. So I chose not to. And then I went out and went back to cattle work for a little while. But at the same time I did that, I also applied to go to Teachers College. And so I did that, went off to Teachers College. And then when I came, for 2 years, I did my teaching degree, did study teaching. And then I had a year's break. So I went back to Alice Springs because I was studying at a place called Bachelor up near Darwin. And so I went back to Alice Springs, had a break. I became Deputy Director of Medical Health in Alice Springs. And I was also the chairman of Impaja Television and also Karma Radio. So I ran 3 big organisations which I was in charge of, and I was only 23, so I was very, very high up in the administration circles. And then in that time I had a break. I went back to teaching, and then something happened where I thought, oh, well, I'll start painting. So I started painting, and it was almost like someone had injected me with a drug. Because as soon as I got that itch, my painting career just took off like fire. And every week for 6 months, I was painting 2 paintings a week. And in that first year of me painting, I made about $70,000-$80,000 in my first year. So I thought, well, if I can do this, I don't have to work. So I resigned as a teacher and took up art as a full-time profession. And I just started teaching myself how to paint. And but from the very first go, I sold everything. So I was selling all my paintings straight away. Even cheap they were cheap, like $500-$600 a painting. And now they're worth $5,000 a painting. Even more than that sometimes. But those first 500 paintings I was selling very, very cheap. And but I was gaining my knowledge. And then I had a break in my marriage, so I left Alice Springs, and then I came to Sydney. And when I came to Sydney, I went back to not to art school or teaching. I went back and became a student, and I went back and studied at a place called the Eora Centre, which was an Aboriginal learning centre, learning college, and I studied music. So piano and everything, the whole lot, writing, notating. I did the whole theory for a whole year, and during that time, because I'm also not just a didgeridoo player, I'm also a musician. I have a rock band. I have my own band, and my band has been going
now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've got music. I'm releasing an album soon. I've released already an album. I've released 3 albums, and I'm about to release my new single with a video clip that I'm doing. And it's a 3-piece band, guitar, bass, and drums. And I play guitar and I sing and I write all the songs. And so what I did was I started this band at the Eora Centre, and it was so successful that almost all the students in my class joined my band, including the teachers.
So you were painting and singing at the same time.
Yeah, and I had not only my teachers, but I had the principal of the college also join my band. So I had 18 people in my band when I first started down here in Sydney, and then after that, the band dwindled away, and everybody left and went on their own way, got married, so forth, all sorts of things, had kids. But I continued. I kept with the band, and sometimes it went down to like one person, me myself. So other members of my band would go away for a year or 2 years, do things and come back. But my band's been going for 30 years, 28 years, something like that. So a long time. And I've had heaps of other musicians, fantastic musicians come through. And so that was really good. I did that. But at the same time also I did that, as soon as I finished that, I also started my, because I have this other business, where I'm a school teacher. So I went back to teaching, but this time I started using my art as a teaching tool. So instead of using the curriculum, I went back to the dream time, and I started teaching my own culture to people. And as a consequence of that, my teaching and my painting started to grow again. So these two things now work together. So my art and my painting and my teaching work together, but one was fueling the other. So one was primarily at the beginning, my painting supported me as a business and for my income. And then when my teaching took over again, and then that became my main income. But in the end, it was both painting and my teaching that I built my business around.
And it's a very good marriage.
Yeah. Well, I thought so too, and it was something I already understood, so I could explain it, in a way that was meaningful for me and also for the people around me. So it wasn't. They were learning the things that I understood. Because as a child growing up in the bush, I have a different way of looking at things than people who grew up in town. Because I don't have those other things, the constraints or ways of thinking. My thinking is all very lateral. I think outside the box sort of things.
Yeah. What a wonderful story. I just had one more question on your painting before I ask you something about music. I mean, you won this, your traditional, in terms of both traditional and contemporary Aboriginal art. You've been so well recognized and you've done really amazing works. Can you show some highlights for our audience? And, what do you want people to think about your paintings?
I started my painting because I wanted to understand things about spirituality. So, because Aboriginal art is very spiritual. And when I started painting, I wanted to understand what was happening to me as an Aboriginal person and why was I painting. Because I don't believe that I just decided myself that I would paint. I believe that something else started me, whether it was my family's spirit or the spirit of my ancestors, or something like that, that made me inquisitive more to find out not only because it wasn't about earning money. It wasn't about it because I was already on a $75,000 salary, so I had good money. But I wanted to find out more about myself and my culture. But instead of learning from somebody, it was like I was learning from a spirit, and the spirit was guiding me in my paintings. So, and then I understood about things about geometry, and one of those is called it's what they call the greatest mathematical equation, which is chaos, and chaos is in chaos within chaos. There's what they call God's thumbprint, and you can come in from all doors, and doesn't matter where you come in, it always reverts back to this what they call the Mandelbrot set, and that's what they call the God's thumbprint. So straight away, there was this. It started making me think more. So, and then what I started doing was I started finding in my paintings. I started finding these same things, Mandelbrot sets, and I was creating them in my painting, unknowingly.
So would you say that these spiritual revelations were what inspired your work and what sort of prompted your work?
Yes. Yes. And
so there was no outside influence as such.
No.
But your inner spiritual revelations.
Yes. Yeah, very much. And so, but I had to pursue this pattern, which I called my signature style. And in a way, I was trying to think. I was sort of being funny to myself, like saying, "Well, I want to do these paintings, and I'll do big dots, and I'll finish it quicker." Because I thought the bigger the dots, the quicker the painting. But in actual fact, I started doing big dots and big circles, and I actually created more work for myself. So I actually became, instead of trying to become minimalist, I became much more focused inward, and I could start to see, I was actually doing detail upon detail, and then in the end I was doing the painting. I had 7 levels on my painting, so I would do a dot 7 times, and so instead of painting the painting once, I would paint the painting several times, and in that way that gave me 3-dimensional feel. So and then on top of that, because I used the chaos theory to paint, I started seeing things in my paintings, and it was like magic was happening. And in my paintings, you could see fish, you could see all these animals, elephants, giraffes. There were also people and buildings, and this is all done randomly. It was no intention, but all these things started to appear in my paintings, and so it was like there was this connection that I finally found that showed me that I was on the right track, and but that was for my own spiritual enhancement or enlightenment. So that gave me strength, and once I saw that, then I was able to do more.
Yeah. So, but that's so lovely. Now I have time for 2 questions. I'm going to ask you one. As a musician, you sing, you write, all of that. But then I want to ask you a question in relation to the didgeridoo. How do you pronounce it?
Didgeridoo, yeah. Didgeridoo. We say hierarchy. So could you say hierarchy?
Didgeridoo.
Didgeridoo. And
didgeridoo.
If you say it the other way with that traditional name, hierarchy.
Hierarchy.
Hierarchy, yeah, that's the right name. That's what we call it.
That's what we call it. Of a name, yeah. I always.
Yeah.
What does it mean, to you, as an Aboriginal leader? What does it mean playing that instrument to you? For you.
Well, once again, I'm a spiritual man, so it was a very spiritual thing to pick up and play. Yeah. But I'm self-taught. Yeah. And the didgeridoo, I taught myself. But a funny thing happened to me when I was 12 years old, and I never ever thought that I'd become a didgeridoo player, never ever. But one day when I was 12, my mother, I used to live in Adelaide, and I used to go down to spend time with my mother in Adelaide, and one day she took me to the Adelaide Museum, and I started walking around the museum and wandered off by myself, and I happened to come across a display that showed Aboriginal artifacts, and it had boomerangs, it had some other artifacts there, it had what they call a little humpy, which is a shelter, and a little fireplace, so it was like a little scene, and right there in the middle of it was a didgeridoo, and the didgeridoo was 400 years old, and it had a sign in the display, "Please do not touch." But once again, I'm inquisitive, so I hopped over the rope, and I sat down in amongst the display, and I played the didgeridoo for about an hour by myself, and no one had ever taught me. It was like the spirit had told me to come and play it, and that was my first time I ever played a didgeridoo. And I never knew. But what happened was, funny enough, was that the staff at the museum didn't kick me out. They let me play.
Wonderful.
And you're not supposed to touch. You're not supposed to touch things.
Yeah, what a lovely story, though. Okay, to end this interview, I just want to know, what are you doing now? You sound like a very busy man. You're a painter, teacher, musician. What are your current projects?
I'm actually painting for an major exhibition. Once the lockdown and all this COVID business goes away, I'm actually setting myself up for a very big exhibition. So I've got major artworks that I'm working on, very big paintings. And I'm also working on a video clip for my new song. And that's been taking a little while because we bought a new camera that we've been experimenting with, and it's fantastic. So it's going to be a great video clip. And I'm also helping to continue with my business because I have a dance troupe. So we do a lot of schoolwork, and we do all the major. We're the main educational entertainment company. So we go out and I have a group of dancers and teachers that we go into, and we teach Aboriginal culture in all the schools and universities in Sydney. Yeah, and so I'm still building that up. And other than that, it's just painting and music. So at the moment, I've got also, because I did some traveling last couple of years ago, and I'm setting up also because my family have land in Central Australia, and we have very big lots. We have a lot of land, and a lot of people want to come to Central Australia to do tourism. So I'm setting up my tours in Central Australia to take people from overseas, from Europe. But the first people that I'm working with is the people from Holland, so the Dutch, because I went over there to Holland a couple of years ago and I taught over there. They flew me there to teach them, so I was teaching Aboriginal culture.
Wow!
And then, so setting that up, and hopefully they will work in conjunction with me, and we'll try and set up something that's going to last forever on my family's land to help my family, financially, as well as creating jobs. So I like to create jobs. So I'm also an employee, so I make sure that my dancers, I pay them very, very well. I pay them better than anybody, and I look after them. And so I just try to do the right thing, really, and help people, and hopefully that that help, or that comes back to me somehow. But I like to help.
Wonderful. You are, to me, a larger than life figure, negotiating so many worlds and doing so well in every sphere. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us your story.
Pleasure. And I just wanted to say that if people want to have a look at my art, that they can go to my website, which is walangari.com.au, and they can check out my paintings and heaps. You can Google my name and I'll come up everywhere.
So it's walangari.com.au.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much. And hopefully we'll see you again someday.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.